Our simple cloud-based platform helps automate your workflow, empowering you to serve your investors and raise more capital with unrivaled efficiency. Invest more and manage less with AppFolio Investment Management.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Jim Young. Welcome to our 5th episode of Realcomm Live. Coming into our first month, I think we're smoothing out some of the issues, and we're getting a little more comfortable, and we're excited to be bringing you this weekly newscast. We've got 2 great guests today, really some thought leaders, some people moving the ball forward, taking chances, taking risks, despite the horrific situation we're all in. And I'm excited to have conversations with these guys and to hopefully give the audience some insight and hope into how to move forward and get people back into buildings. So before we bring on our first guest, I'm just going to show you a short clip, and then we're going to bring them on.
It just started becoming more and more serious.
That we were going to get shut down.
When the world went remote, we stayed connected.
Nebraska gave me the tools that I needed.
My hat's off to all the professors.
You're a student, you're an individual.
My professor, she was really good about checking in with her students.
And she helped me to realize that this is an opportunity
to experience the community, the togetherness, a bond that people, when I go to other states, they just don't understand it. Just Husker Nation is just something that's like none other, second to none, absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to bring on my first guest and one of my new heroes, Lalit Agarwal, the Director of Utility and Energy Planning at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Lalit, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Jim. How are you doing today?
Good. And I am not joking when I'm calling you one of my new heroes.
You're very kind.
In an age of no, you guys are so impressed me on how you're taking logical, conservative yet practical steps to get your students back on campus. And I'm really excited for our audience to hear about this story and all the great work you're doing. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And whatever I share today, I want to assure you a lot of hours by a lot of people have gone into it to make sure that we were able to open our campus in fall in a safe and healthy manner.
Well, let's start with the first step. Getting the campus safe, right? Looking at all the different things that go on in a small city, ingress, egress, desks, germs, social distancing, mask, all the things that we've been hearing about for the last 6 months. And again, you're not talking about one building, you're talking about multiple buildings. Why don't you give the audience just a little understanding of what you went through and the thought process you used regarding the safety and health protocols?
Sure. So we are about 25,000 students in the Lincoln campus, about 15 million square feet. That's the size of our campus. And about 45% of our campus is a research or science and research space. When the pandemic started back in March, we went into remote learning mode and soon realized that some of our infrastructure was not ready for delivering hybrid or remote learning as well as effectively as we wanted. So we started preparing for what fall looks like. And very early into the pandemic, our senior leadership made a decision that we were actually going to meet in person as much as we could when fall came around. So we started planning on what that looks like back in April timeframe. During that time, if you all remember, we could not find hand sanitizers or any PPE or wellness supplies. We work very closely with our food processing center here on campus, and they actually got an FDA approval to make hand sanitizer and disinfectant on campus. And that was a very early victory for us. But the other challenge remained, how are we going to deliver this to our community members? And we decided that the challenge of refilling a smaller container would be probably impossible because of the volume of hand sanitizer needed. So we actually constructed and designed a PVC pipe-based hand sanitizer dispenser on campus, which also included one part that required us to do 3D printing. And we created 600 of these stations that are now dispersed all across campus, and that has reduced our refilling needs compared to a smaller, less than a gallon station. These hold about 3 gallons. On top of this, we also installed some wellness stations inside the classrooms. So the students are responsible for cleaning up after their classes and wiping their spaces. We work with our local community county health department and created test sites on campus so students didn't have to leave campus and go to the one in the city. We also uh, got guidance from CDC and ASHRAE to adjust our HVAC systems. Specifically, we increased ventilation in our spaces based on the guidance, and also upgraded our filters where the filters were not up to snuff in certain buildings that we had.
So before I got a whole bunch of questions for you, but before we move on to the next issue, what was it about your university where when most people were saying no, and in fact, most people are still saying no, tell me about the dynamics, the thinking, the type of people that got together and said, we're not going to sit around and wait, we're going to fight this thing head on. Tell me a little bit about that culture.
So we have a can-do attitude. One of the things that I think in one of our previous conversations I shared with you, we are a very unique campus. We don't buy our building automation system from anybody. We make our own building automation system. We write our own software. We design and manufacture our own hardware for our controllers inside the buildings. So we've always had this can-do attitude. Some of the question you're asking goes back to our senior leadership, and I would tell you that I am way down on the totem pole to be part of those conversations. But the sentiment is still the same. We were sort of a little fortunate also because we do live in a less dense city and a less dense state. And the pandemic did not hit us any number, any infection is still a bad infection, but we were very fortunate that our density kind of worked in our favor.
Well, I know firsthand because I've got kids in university, and my daughter, who goes to a pretty reputable school here on the West Coast, her living dorms, basically, they went so far as to deliver hand sanitizer. That was about it. So let's go on to the next topic.
Okay.
The classroom. What did you do inside the classroom?
So inside the classroom, as I said, we created these wellness stations that had hand sanitizer disinfectants from the wellness point of view. And the students and faculty were responsible for taking care of their spaces. In addition to that, we also readjusted where the classrooms were offered based on enrollment. So we readjusted based on the size. And if the furniture was modular, we moved the furniture around so social distancing could be achieved naturally. If we could not move the furniture around, we marked certain chairs to be non-usable, and that allowed social distancing. On top of that, we went into a hybrid mode when it was impossible to fit all the students. If we have a Tuesday, Thursday class, then half the students would come to class on Tuesday and the remaining would stay home on the remote learning mode. And then you flip the population on Thursday. But one of the challenges we found in spring, as I mentioned earlier, was that some of our networking gear inside the buildings to enable the live streaming that we wanted to achieve was we had plans to upgrade them for a while now. IT department in our campus was working towards it. But as I say, don't let a crisis go to waste. So this became an opportunity for us to accelerate that upgrade. A lot of our classrooms did have technology built in for at least the AV to show what the students in classroom were learning. But then we added extra technology like cameras and smart cards that allowed the professors and teachers to keep engaging the remainder of the students that were not physically present, and they were all taking remote classes either from their dorm or their home.
Well, if you think about that, that's what we're actually trying to accomplish in our hybrid event, which will be the first one at least in the United States, if not the world. And we fully understand we're not going to have crowds like we did in Nashville, 2,500 people last year, but we know we have to start someplace.
Right.
And what I was so fascinated about what you were telling me is you outfitted this classroom with the right cameras, facing the students, facing the professor. So if a student woke up and simply said, I'm late for class, I can't make it. Forget the pandemic. Let's think about the future.
Right.
I can't make it to that classroom in 20 minutes. Okay, today I'll just go on remote, right? And then, today we're having a big discussion, big debate. I am going in. And then if all of a sudden you see too many kids coming back to class where social distancing an issue, you can simply say, okay, you groups stay home. But you have figured out the relationship between on-site or online, I should say, and on-site. And you don't get that sitting in the first row. The only way you do that is swinging the bat, probably failing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But think about how much further ahead you are now that you've taken this can-do attitude and figured these things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is to say in future we would be able to deliver education to people that don't even live in Lincoln, don't even live in the United States. They live anywhere in the world, and they can get a degree from our institution. I'm not saying we are there yet. It will probably take a lot more infrastructure and a lot more adjustment to the curriculum. But I think that there is a definite future possibility that this might change the way we deliver education in future.
And trust me, we're all tired of Zoom meetings and video conferencing. It is encouraging to see humans next to each other,
Mm-hmm.
well, even in a smaller group, right? Smaller numbers, safely spaced. But for somebody to come in for an online class, and it's literally not just watching the professor on a screen, but seeing the professor interact with students on that LED wall that you and I were talking about earlier.
Right.
This is not, we're never going back to normal. And this is something the Realcomm's been talking about for 20 years. The perfect intersection of technology and space. What does that mean? And I think your university is at the forefront of figuring it out. And I just want to say thank you for your efforts, your can-do attitude, and for coming on today to share your experience and to let people know, despite however bad things can be, you can still move forward.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
unfortunately, we are out of time. But again, thank you, and we look forward to continue our relationship. As I said, you're one of my new heroes, and we're not going to let you go anytime soon.
I'm not going anywhere. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
You have a great day. Be well.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. With that, why don't we take a brief break and hear from one of our sponsors. All right, we're back. One of my next guest is not only a thought leader in the industry, but he's a friend going back at least 20 years. I first met Don when he was the CIO for CBRE, and that friendship and that collaboration has been going on for what seems like at least 20 plus years. Before I bring Don on, we're going to show you a brief clip, and then we're going to get into a very interesting conversation on cyber in this time of coronavirus.
We believe that by following proper protocols, it is safe to go back into the buildings, and I'm delighted that 5Q Cyber is leading the way.
The office furniture has been moved to create a safe distance between each team member, and we've established a new COVID safety policy that includes temperature taking, hand washing, and disinfecting wipes to clean the workspace upon arrival and end of day.
We can assure our clients that we are focused on safety first.
All right. With that, I'd like to bring on our next guest, Don Goldstein, the CEO of 5Q Cyber.
Hey, Jim.
How are you, Don? Great to see you.
Great.
Things going well?
Things are going fantastic. Thanks for having me in this great forum, and hope we can deliver a message today.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned in the intro, you and I go back a long time. And have been fighting this real estate technology innovation battle for at least 2 decades. I mean, I think your career is probably 30 years. Mine is approaching that as well. And it's good to still see people out there fighting for positive change. You know, the integration of technology into buildings and really making the workplace and all buildings better, safer, more intuitive. So one of the things that we want to get to today is on cyber, obviously, because during this time, now that the buildings are being accessed more remotely for maintenance and diagnostics, and workforces are moving into homes where enterprise networks have not been secured. Lots to talk about on that. But before we get there, tell me about what you've experienced in the last 6 months about developing an environment where people can feel comfortable and safe and confident to get back into a building. Why don't we start there?
Sure. So we look at it from 2 aspects. One aspect is our own business, our own people, right? Who just want to be together. Like you said earlier about, there's Zoom fatigue, right? Everybody wants to really be together and interact, especially in the informal mode. But then we have the other side of a lot of our business is getting our engineers out to the field and into properties and campuses and buildings and doing those cyber assessments and remediations, and working with the building engineers and the property managers. So we're very fortunate that, yes, we took a little bit of a pause initially, starting in March, but then a couple months later, our clients and our engineers were ready to go back into the buildings, because the realization was that the longer we don't do that, the more risk inside of those buildings for the time when people come back in. So for the last 6 months, our engineers have been traveling every single week, going to different parts of the country safely, but effectively into those buildings, working with our clients, working with the state and local guidelines, and then working with our own guidelines to make sure we keep our people safe and the people in the building safe.
So I don't want to focus on it, but I can't miss the point where you said traveling for the last 6 months. A lot of people's fears and concerns are around traveling, about getting in an airplane. Tell us some of your experiences with these engineers are obviously flying. Yep. What is that like? And is it as concerning as everybody thinks it is?
Jim, it's a personal thing for me because I have a son who's in active duty in the U.S. Air Force and has been flying for 12 years. And I talked to him and I said to my son, what do you think about getting back into planes? He said, it's the safest place you can be. Planes are as safe as you can ever imagine. They have to be. Otherwise, those airlines wouldn't let people back on the planes if they didn't think it was safe, right? So while we're so worried about what's going to happen in our buildings or in other parts of what I would call critical infrastructure where people want to get back, planes are safe. Our people have been on planes, like I said, every single week, going to all different parts of the country, go safely, come back safely. They wear their masks. They're very careful on the way to the airport, in the airport, on the plane, and obviously in the buildings.
Using common sense protocols, being very aware of your surroundings. There is nothing in life that's possible without risk. Nothing. I mean, you can walk outside and get hit by a car. And our folks have been flying as well. I'll be flying to Denver in a couple of weeks for our hybrid event for the onsite. So will you? Yep, exactly. So, okay, let's move into the building. So the engineers get to the building. I'm sure they're donning, their PPE, their masks, and social distancing. What are they seeing when they get into the buildings? I'm hearing on a conversation last week, New York at about 10 to maybe 12%, and San Francisco at 2% occupancy. What are your engineers seeing when they get back in the buildings? I mean, they're obviously working with building personnel, but are they empty? What are they seeing?
It depends, because when you're in a multifamily building, it's fully occupied.
Right.
So those have no issues. Certainly in the healthcare industry, in the MOBs, right, and plays in pharma, and those, they have to be in their buildings, right? All their tech, everything is in those buildings. So in terms of certain buildings, they're pretty well occupied and they're doing quite well. Other buildings we go into, a lot of office, right? they're not so full. They're pretty empty. But the good news is that gives my engineers kind of free reign to go around and look at everything they need to look at without worrying about what they may run into, just to be prepared for when the properties are and the companies are willing to come back into those buildings.
Okay.
But they're seeing the same threats, the same issues that they were seeing pre-COVID, they're seeing during, and I'm sure they'll see post-COVID.
Well, and that's why I want to get to the cyber conversation. So, everybody locked down, buildings kind of, open, not a lot of people in them. A lot of the conversations you've had and conversations I've had with the Real Estate Cyber Consortium was, this is a time when threat escalation, we're seeing threat escalation, right? We're kind of on the defensive mode. We can't be out there as aggressive as we want. And so we're seeing a rise in cyber incidents, and especially in the OT world, right? Where buildings can be impacted. What are you looking for when you go in and do one of these assessments?
Well, they go into every room where there's any system that is or could be connected to the outside world, right? They'll certainly go into the property management office. They'll go into, say, a business area where, people can feel free to sit down and use that equipment. They're still doing that. So there may be a business center, right? And then certainly we're going into all the wire closets. We're tracing wires. We're looking into where all the systems connected in any part of the building, including sometimes the rooftop, right? So we go everywhere. We always go, and we go safely. And the building engineers are right there with us often, or they'll just say, we know you guys know what you're doing. Just go and do what you have to do. So really, there really isn't anything we miss. And that's why you have to be on site to do that, because there are things you see, not just from the connectivity issue, but operational security issues, right? Doors left open.
And hearing you talk, I have about 30 questions I want to have answered, but we only have about a minute or two left.
We'll get to Realcomm at the end of the month, Jim.
Yeah, well, we will definitely get into detail then, but I do want to ask you one more question. If you were talking out to the commercial corporate real estate industry, what would you say to them as far as, getting back in the building safely, confidently? I know you're out there, right on the front lines. What would you do to motivate or convince them that we can move towards getting people into these buildings?
It's to me, we started with this. It's common sense. Obviously, there are some hot spots you have to be careful of. There are people who are at risk. I'm not saying you force anybody to go into a situation they're not comfortable with, but I don't see really any reason why we can't start safely getting back in the buildings following the protocols. There just isn't any reason not to, and hold people back from the interactions that they need and the businesses that need to operate. It can be done safely, and it should be done.
And I think it's important to point out, nobody's talking about 100%. No. But we can't go from 10% to 100% overnight. It's going to have to be incrementally, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever. And what we learn when we send 10, 15, 20% of the people back in the office helps us to bring back the 40%. And I, like you, would encourage our industry to move a little faster because the economic impacts to this, in my opinion, will be 10x that of this pandemic if we don't get this economy in a position to be moving back. And so I think
we stuck at 10%, Jim.
Yep, we can't. I mean, we cannot. So
I'm a cyber guy, right? So I tend to be a little risk averse, but the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I think is just over the top right now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for your leadership, your vision, your interest in working on this and getting people back out there safely and confidently. You have been a friend of the industry for a long time, and you continue to be. So thank you for coming on today, and I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Jim. See you then. Look forward to it.
Be safe. All right. Let's move into our final segment, our weekly news brief with Sherry Whitmore. Sherry has done a great job compiling the news for us. And every week we bring you the top 2 or 3, and that allows you to enjoy the news that we think is important without having to take the time that Sherry does. Sherry, how are you?
Doing well, Jim. Thank you. All right. Our lead story this week comes from MIT Technology Review. A recent 5G tech report examines how operators are transforming business and technology environments to deliver 5G enterprise services. particularly focused on cloud, automation, and the emerging ecosystems driving digital transformation across industries. IT heads from Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone Business, AT&T, and Korea Telecom, interviewed for this report, argue that the most compelling market opportunities for 5G are in enterprise and public sector digitalization programs. These involve drawing on 5G's powerful capabilities around throughput, mobility, reliability, latency, and data volume to host and manage a rich set of applications and technology in sectors such as healthcare, construction, retail, and smart cities. Our second story details a typical day in a COVID-free smart building. CDO Trends calls for smart buildings and cities to evolve rapidly as key contributors to pandemic management, public health, and safety. Focused on infection prevention in the new normal, the post-COVID office transformation chronologizes facial recognition for entry control, non-intrusive and autonomous temperature screening, touchless sensored elevators, UV light air conditioning, alerts triggered due to compliance failure, and end-of-day health screenings. The article emphasizes how smart buildings will help businesses and organizations automate increasingly complex facilities management, practice effective crowd control, and meet regulations. Our final story explores the shifting tenant priorities accelerated by the pandemic. A panel of real estate execs from Gensler, Kelroy Realty, Cushman & Wakefield, and JLL converged for a NAIOP digital conversation, surfacing trends in CRE office design. Tenants today desire touchless technologies, health-conscious design, improved air quality, and more indoor-outdoor workspaces. The panel also examined operational changes in the sudden shift to remote work and future demands of office space.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I just want to say thank you for all your efforts. I know what it takes to scan the globe each week and find the relevant topics and news stories, so our world doesn't have to do it. And then coming on the show and giving us the top three and encouraging people to sign up for that weekly news brief. So thank you for all you do. And as always, a great job.
Thanks, Jim. My pleasure.
All right. Before I wrap up, let's hear a brief word from one of our longstanding commercial or sponsors, Altus.
Altus Group's software, data, and advisory services help bring the clarity, perspective, and insights you need to minimize the risk and maximize the value of your investments. Because it's not simply how much data you have, it's how clearly you see it.
All right. Well, that is about going to wrap our 5th episode of Realcomm Live. As I said, each week we're learning more and more, and it's becoming a really enjoyable process to find the speakers, get the tough questions out there. But I just want to make the point that we cannot do this, and this broadcast will not get better without you, without your input. So first and foremost, I'd ask you, if you've enjoyed this, post this up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere else you can find. But even more importantly, we want to hear from you. We want your questions. We want your issues. We want the things that are on your mind. And of course, we also want your criticism. If you don't agree with something that was said, or if you don't think a topic is important as we do, let us know. The only way this show is going to get better is if we get feedback from you, the audience. A lot of work, time, and effort goes into this, and we're doing this for you, so our industry has a place to go each week to figure out what's going on. So with that, I would like to thank our guests today, Don and Lalit, two phenomenal gentlemen, leaders, visionaries, hard workers, and really are doing some great work. And just let you know that next week we have another 2 great guests from Cone Resnick. We have Tama Huang and Emmanuel Daniel from Microsoft. 2 leaders in those organizations, globetrotters at the forefront of all these topics, and it's really looking to be a great show. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week.